My beloved child. Before you scroll away, before you allow another distraction to pull your attention elsewhere, hear this. Something has been trying to reach you. Not through coincidence. Not through chance. Not through a random sequence of events. What you are about to hear was meant to find you at this exact moment. There is a reason your eyes stopped here. There is a reason your spirit felt a strange pull toward this message. And there is a reason your heart has been restless lately, even during moments when everything appeared calm on the surface. For days, weeks, perhaps even months, there has been an invisible conversation taking place beyond what your physical eyes can see. Threads of memory, emotion, regret, longing, and destiny have been weaving themselves together in ways you could never fully understand. Tonight, those threads are beginning to reveal themselves. Listen carefully. A voice from the past has been echoing through unseen places. A voice connected to a soul you once knew. A soul who once stood close enough to touch your heart. A soul whose absence changed something inside you. A soul you may have tried to forget. Or perhaps a soul you never truly stopped thinking about. And now, there is something you need to hear. Not because it will erase every wound. Not because it will instantly answer every question. But because the truth has been waiting longer than you realize. My child, there are moments in life when people walk away physically, yet their spirit continues carrying pieces of what was shared. Time passes. Seasons change. New faces appear. Entire chapters unfold. Yet certain connections refuse to disappear. They linger. Not because they are unfinished by accident, but because they were never meant to be forgotten. Your soulmate's ex has been carrying a burden. A burden that grew heavier each time they pretended they were unaffected. A burden that followed them into quiet nights when nobody else was around. A burden hidden beneath smiles that convinced everyone except themselves. You never saw those moments. You were never supposed to. But heaven sees what human eyes cannot. And heaven has witnessed something remarkable. The person who once believed they had moved on completely discovered that some truths cannot be buried beneath pride. Some emotions cannot be locked behind closed doors forever. And some names refuse to fade. Your name became one of those names. There were evenings when they sat alone, replaying old conversations they swore they had forgotten. There were mornings when memories appeared unexpectedly, triggered by a song, a scent, a familiar place. There were times when they laughed at something and suddenly remembered how you used to laugh. And in those unexpected moments, a realization would arrive. A realization they never wanted to admit. You mattered more than they allowed themselves to believe. The strange part is that this realization did not arrive all at once. It came in fragments. Tiny pieces. Small flashes. Little reminders that slipped through the cracks of everyday life. At first they ignored them. Then they dismissed them. Then they fought them. But eventually the truth became impossible to silence. And what happened next surprised even them. Instead of remembering arguments, they remembered kindness. Instead of replaying mistakes, they remembered moments of genuine connection. Instead of focusing on endings, they found themselves revisiting beginnings. The very beginnings they once took for granted. The first conversations. The first moments of comfort. The first feeling that something meaningful was unfolding. The first glimpse of a future they secretly imagined. And with every memory, another question emerged. What if they misunderstood something important? What if they walked away from a blessing while believing it was a burden? What if the story they told themselves was never the complete truth? My child, this is where the situation becomes deeper than you realize. Because while they were wrestling with these thoughts, something unexpected began happening within their spirit. Dreams became more vivid. Memories became more frequent. Certain emotions became impossible to ignore. And every attempt to suppress those feelings only seemed to strengthen them. It felt as though invisible doors were opening. Doors they thought had been permanently sealed. One night, after convincing themselves they had finally moved on, they found themselves staring into darkness, unable to sleep. Hours passed. The silence grew heavier. The world around them seemed frozen. And then a thought appeared. Simple. Clear. Unavoidable. What if I was wrong? That question echoed through them. Again. And again. And again. Because once truth knocks on the door of the soul, pretending not to hear it becomes exhausting. Yet they still resisted. Pride whispered its familiar arguments. Fear repeated its warnings. Past disappointments replayed old narratives. But the question remained. What if I was wrong? And every day afterward, that question grew louder. Not because someone forced it. Not because anyone manipulated it. But because truth carries its own power. My beloved child, there are things people confess publicly. And then there are things they confess only when nobody is listening. This message comes from the second place. The hidden place. The vulnerable place. The place where masks fall away. The place where honesty finally speaks. Because if they could stand before you right now without fear, without ego, without defensiveness, there are words they have been holding inside. Words they never expected to carry for this long. Words they never thought they would need to say. And the first thing they would tell you is this. I never realized how much of my life you touched until you were no longer standing beside me. Not because you were perfect. Not because the relationship was flawless. Not because every moment was easy. But because your presence became woven into parts of their world they only noticed after the silence arrived. Sometimes people discover value through presence. Other times they discover value through absence. And unfortunately, many discover it through loss. That realization has been following them. Quietly. Patiently. Relentlessly. There have been moments when they attempted to convince themselves it was nostalgia. Moments when they blamed loneliness. Moments when they insisted they were simply romanticizing the past. Yet every explanation eventually collapsed. Because the feeling remained. Steady. Persistent. Real. And then another layer revealed itself. one they never anticipated. The more they reflected on the connection, the more they began recognizing things they failed to appreciate while they were happening. The support you offered. The understanding you gave. The patience you showed. The ways you carried burdens without demanding recognition. The ways you loved even when circumstances became difficult. The ways you remained genuine in a world increasingly filled with performance. Suddenly memories started looking different. Situations appeared through a new lens. Events they once interpreted one way began revealing another perspective. And with every new perspective came another uncomfortable truth. Perhaps they had not seen you clearly. Perhaps they had been looking through the fog of their own fears. Perhaps they had projected wounds onto situations that deserved greater understanding. My child, these realizations are not easy. Especially for someone who spent so long believing their version of events was complete. Especially for someone who built emotional walls to protect themselves. Especially for someone who convinced themselves they had all the answers. Yet life has a remarkable way of humbling the human heart. And humility often arrives carrying revelations. That is exactly what has been happening. Little by little. Layer by layer. The walls have been cracking. And behind those walls, emotions long ignored have been waiting. One memory leads to another. One realization unlocks another. One truth reveals another. Until eventually they found themselves confronting a reality they never expected. The connection meant more than they admitted. Far more. What makes this story extraordinary is that nobody around them fully understands what is happening. Friends see fragments. Family notices subtle changes. But the deeper transformation remains hidden. Only heaven sees the entire picture. Only heaven sees the moments when they pause unexpectedly because a memory surfaced. Only heaven sees the conversations they have with themselves. Only heaven sees the silent regrets. Only heaven sees the questions they cannot answer. And one question has become especially powerful. A question they never expected to ask. A question they have avoided repeatedly. A question that refuses to disappear. What if our story was not what I thought it was? That question changed everything. Because once a person genuinely asks it, they begin seeing differently. They begin noticing signs they previously ignored. They begin revisiting conclusions they once considered final. They begin recognizing possibilities where they once saw only endings. And this process has led them somewhere unexpected. Somewhere vulnerable. Somewhere honest. Somewhere sacred. There is something they want you to know. Something that has been growing inside them. Something they have struggled to put into words. It is not merely regret. It is not merely longing. It is not merely curiosity. It is something deeper. A recognition. A recognition that certain souls leave fingerprints on the heart. Not temporary marks. Permanent ones. The kind that remain long after circumstances change. The kind that survive distance. The kind that survive silence. The kind that survive years. Your presence became one of those fingerprints. And now they cannot pretend otherwise. Yet my child, the story does not end there. Because another revelation has been unfolding. One that even they did not anticipate. As these emotions surfaced, they began noticing unusual moments. Moments that felt strangely guided. Moments that seemed almost impossible to explain. They would think about you unexpectedly. Then hear your name. They would remember a specific memory. Then encounter something connected to it. They would dismiss it as coincidence. Then another moment would happen. And another. And another. Until coincidence became difficult to believe. The universe seemed determined to place reminders directly in their path. Not constantly. Not dramatically. But consistently enough to capture attention. And every reminder carried the same silent question. Have you truly understood what this connection meant? That question has been following them like an echo. An echo growing louder with time. An echo impossible to outrun. My beloved child, many people believe endings erase significance. They do not. Sometimes endings reveal significance. Sometimes separation exposes value. Sometimes distance illuminates truths that proximity concealed. And that is exactly what has been happening. The distance created clarity. The silence created awareness. The absence created understanding. Now they find themselves standing at the edge of an emotional crossroads. One path continues pretending none of this matters. The other path requires honesty. Real honesty. The kind that changes people. The kind that transforms perspectives. The kind that rewrites futures. They have been standing at that crossroads longer than anyone realizes. Longer than they admit. Longer than they planned. And every day the choice becomes harder to avoid. Because truth has momentum. Once awakened, it rarely returns to sleep. Something inside them knows this. Something inside them understands a moment of decision is approaching. Yet there is still one final revelation they have not fully faced. One truth they keep circling around. One truth they keep approaching before pulling away. One truth connected directly to you. And this truth is far more powerful than the memories. Far more powerful than the regrets. Far more powerful than the nostalgia. Because it concerns what they discovered recently. A discovery that shook them deeply. A discovery that challenged everything they believed. A discovery that began with a conversation they never expected to have. At first it seemed ordinary. Just another discussion. Just another passing moment. Nothing unusual. Nothing important. Or so they thought. But during that conversation, a question was asked. A simple question. An innocent question. Yet the answer changed the atmosphere completely. The room became quieter. The energy shifted. And suddenly your name entered the conversation. The moment it did, something happened. Something nobody expected. Something that caught them completely off guard. The reactions that followed were not what they anticipated. Not even close. Faces changed. Expressions softened. People who rarely spoke emotionally suddenly had something to say. And as the conversation continued, truth after truth began surfacing. Observations. Memories. Perspectives. Things they had never heard before. Things nobody had shared previously. Things that revealed an entirely different picture. A picture they were unprepared to see. What was said next struck them so deeply that they have not stopped thinking about it since. The words continue replaying in their mind. The realization continues unfolding. And the meaning behind those words is larger than they first understood. Much larger. In fact, what they heard that day may become the turning point of everything. But they are still processing it. Still trying to understand it. Still trying to accept what it means. And my child, what was spoken during that conversation carries a message that was never meant to remain hidden. A message connected to your journey. A message connected to their journey. A message connected to a future neither of you can fully see yet. The details of that revelation are closer than you think. Closer than they think. Closer than anyone realizes. And when the full truth emerges, nothing will look quite the same again. Because the next piece of this story contains the secret they never expected to discover. And what they learned about you in that moment changed everything. Part 1 ends on the cliffhanger. Request Part 2 when you're ready.